The Nevada sun sank low, its dying light casting a blood-red glow across the parched plains, where dust and despair clung to every blade of brittle grass. Jonah Wade stood on the edge of his struggling farm, his hands calloused and stained with earth, his eyes squinting against the glare. At 47, he was a man worn by the land's cruelty, his broad frame stooped by years of toil and loss. His farm, once a patchwork of green hope, was now a battlefield of cracked soil and wilted crops, its irrigation ditch dry as bone under the relentless drought. The wind carried the faint hum of the nearby mining town of Silver Creek, a reminder of the world that had taken everything from him. 3 years ago, a mine collapse had stolen his wife, Abigail, and their daughter, Lila, both working as cooks for the miners. Jonah had been left with nothing but a shovel, a few acres, and a heart heavy with grief. He toiled alone, his only companions his mule, Dusty, and the memories that haunted the creaking walls of his small cabin. The townsfolk in Silver Creek whispered of his stubbornness, urging him to sell to Silas Kane, the mining baron whose greed swallowed farms and futures alike. But Jonah held fast, the land his last tie to the family he'd lost. As dusk settled, Jonah knelt by his meager corn patch, pulling the last of the season's stunted ears. His pantry was nearly bare, a sack of flour, a few potatoes, a single loaf of bread baked from Abigail's recipe. He'd planned to ration it for the week, but hunger gnawed at his gut, a constant companion in this unforgiving land. He stood, wiping sweat from his brow, when a shadow staggered across the plain. A man, ragged and swaying, his steps faltering as if the desert itself had drained him dry. Jonah's hand drifted to the old revolver at his hip, his instincts sharpened by years of survival. Strangers in these parts often brought trouble, and Silas Kane's men were known to prowl, scouting land for their master's empire. But as the figure drew closer, Jonah saw no threat, only desperation. The man was older, perhaps in his 50s, his face gaunt beneath a tattered hat, his duster coat torn and caked with dust. He collapsed at the edge of Jonah's field, his breath a ragged gasp, his hands clutching nothing but air. Every fiber of Jonah's being urged him to turn away. He had little to spare, and kindness in the West was a risk that often cost more than it gave. But Abigail's voice echoed in his mind, soft and steady. "We share what we have, Jonah. It's what makes us human." He cursed under his breath, slinging his rifle over his shoulder, and approached the stranger, kneeling to check his pulse. The man's eyes fluttered, their gray depths clouded with exhaustion but sharp with something else, secrets, perhaps, or fear. "Hey," Jonah said, his voice rough. "You alive?" The stranger stirred, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Barely. Name's Elias. Been walking. Days." Jonah hauled him up, half carrying him to the cabin's porch. Dusty snorted from the lean-to, as if questioning his choice, but Jonah ignored her. Inside, he settled Elias on a chair by the hearth, stoking a fire to chase the evening's chill. The stranger's hands trembled as he took the tin cup of water Jonah offered, drinking deeply, his eyes scanning the sparse room. A table, a single bed, a faded quilt Abigail had sewn. "You're a fool to help me," Elias said, his voice stronger now, tinged with a wry edge. "Folks like me bring trouble." Jonah grunted, slicing his last loaf of bread and setting a plate of corn and potatoes before Elias. "Eat," he said. "Trouble's already here. Ain't no stranger to it." Elias hesitated, his gaze lingering on the meager meal. "This your last?" "Don't matter," Jonah said, turning away to hide the pang in his chest. "Can't let a man starve." Turned, they ate in silence, the fire's crackle a counterpoint to the wind's low moan outside. Elias devoured the food, his hunger plain, but his movements were careful, deliberate, as if guarding a secret. Jonah watched him, noting the scars on his hands, the kind earned in mines or battles. "Where you from?" Jonah asked, his tone cautious. Elias's eyes flicked to the window, as if expecting shadows. "Silver Creek, once. Prospector. Knew the mines better than most. Got on the wrong side of Silas Kane." Jonah's jaw tightened. Kane's name was a curse in these parts, a man whose wealth and cruelty ruled the town. "What'd you do to cross him?" Elias's smile was thin, bitter. "Knew too much. Seen things he don't want found." He didn't elaborate, and Jonah didn't press, sensing the weight of a story not yet ready to be told. As night deepened, Jonah lit a lantern, its glow casting long shadows. Elias leaned back, his strength returning, and studied Jonah with a look that pierced deeper than the desert sun. "Why share your food?" he asked. "You don't know me." Jonah's gaze drifted to the quilt. Its stitches a map of Abigail's love. "My wife, she'd have done the same." Said kindness was the only thing the land couldn't take. Elias nodded, something like respect in his eyes. She was right. But kindness comes at a cost out here. The conversation was cut short by a distant sound, hooves, faint but purposeful, echoing across the plains. Jonah grabbed his rifle, moving to the window. 3 riders paused at the edge of his land, their silhouettes dark against the starlit sky. They didn't approach, but their presence was a warning, a promise of Cain's reach. Jonah's heart pounded, his mind flashing to the mine collapse, to the greed that had stolen his family. "Cain's men," he muttered. Elias joined him, his face grim. "They're looking for me. You harbor me, you're painting a target on your back." Jonah's grip tightened on his rifle, his voice low. "Ain't sending you out to die. Not tonight." Elias studied him, then nodded, a silent pact forming in the dim light. "You're a rare man, Jonah Wade," he said. "I won't forget this." The riders vanished into the night, their hoofbeats fading, but the tension lingered. Jonah sat by the fire, rifle across his lap, as Elias settled on a pallet by the hearth. The stranger's words echoed in Jonah's mind, stirring a mix of dread and resolve. He'd given his last meal, risking Cain's wrath, but the act felt like a defiance of the despair that had gripped him since Abigail and Lila's deaths. The chapter closed with Jonah watching the darkness, the cabin a fragile haven against the threats circling his land. The drought, Cain's men, Elias's secrets, they were all storms gathering on the horizon. Yet, in sharing his meal, Jonah had planted a seed, small but stubborn, of something he thought he'd lost: hope. The stranger slept, his breathing steady, and Jonah knew the West would demand a price for his kindness, but for now, he was ready to pay it. The Nevada dawn broke harsh and unrelenting, the sun, a merciless eye glaring over the cracked plains. Jonah Wade stood by his dry irrigation ditch, its crumbling banks a mockery of the farm's fading life. The air was thick with dust, the drought's grip tightening like a noose around his crops. His mule, dusty, grazed listlessly nearby, her ribs stark against her hide. Inside the cabin, Elias, the stranger Jonah had fed the night before, slept by the hearth, his ragged form a quiet reminder of the risk Jonah had taken. The riders, Silas Cain's men, had vanished into the night, but their shadow lingered, a warning of trouble circling closer. Jonah's hands tightened around his shovel, the weight of his choice heavy. Sharing his last meal with Elias had been an act of defiance against the despair that had haunted him since Abigail and Lila's deaths in the mine collapse. But kindness in the West was a gamble, and Jonah felt the odds stacking against him. The memory of Cain's scouts, their rifles glinting in the starlight, stirred a familiar dread, the same helplessness he'd felt when the mine took his family. Elias emerged from the cabin, his steps steadier but his gray eyes wary, scanning the horizon like a hunted man. His tattered duster hung loose, but there was a strength in him, a resilience that spoke of battles fought and survived. "You're up early," he said, his voice rough but tinged with gratitude. "Didn't sleep, did you?" Jonah shrugged, his gaze on the ditch. "Sleep don't come easy when trouble's riding close." Elias nodded, crouching to inspect the cracked earth. "This ditch is your lifeline," he said. "I know water. Worked the mines, learned their secrets, how to find what's hidden under the ground. Let me help fix it." Jonah hesitated, his instincts warring with the stranger's offer. Trust was a rare coin in these parts, and Elias's cryptic talk of Cain hinted at a past that could bring more than just labor. But the farm was dying, and Jonah was one man against a merciless land. "All right," he said finally, "but you tell me why Cain's after you." "No secrets." Elias's jaw tightened, but he nodded. As they worked, shoveling dirt and shoring up the ditch's banks, he spoke in a low voice. "I was a prospector for Cain's company. Found a vein of gold, richer than anything in Silver Creek. But it's on land. He don't own land like yours. He wants me dead, 'cause I know where it is, and I won't bend." Jonah's shovel paused, the weight of Elias's words sinking in. Gold was a curse in Nevada, drawing men like Cain who'd burn the world for a glint of it. "You sayin' my land's got gold?" he asked, his voice low. Elias met his gaze, his eyes steady. "Maybe. But I ain't here to dig it up. I'm here 'cause you fed me when you had nothing. That's a debt I don't take lightly." The word stirred something in Jonah, a flicker of the hope Abigail had always carried. They worked through the morning, their hands blistering as they rebuilt the ditch, guiding what little water remained toward the wilted corn. Elias's knowledge was uncanny, his hands deft as he carved channels to catch the flow. Jonah watched, grudging respect growing despite his caution. Midday brought a visitor, Amos Reed, Jonah's nearest neighbor, a wiry farmer whose land bordered his own. Amos was a man of few words, his face lined by years of drought and debt, but he'd shared a fence line with Jonah for a decade, their bond forged in shared hardship. He rode up, his horse lathered, his eyes darting to Elias with suspicion. "Heard you got company," Amos said, dismounting. "Cain's men are talking in town, looking for a stranger." Jonah's gut twisted, Ezra's betrayal in his last story echoing in Amos's tone. "He's with me," Jonah said, his voice firm. "Helping with the farm." Amos's lips thinned. "You're playing with fire, Jonah. Cain don't take kindly to folks harboring his enemies. Turn him out, or you'll lose what little you got left." Elias stepped forward, his stance relaxed but his eyes hard. "Cain's the one who should be running. He's stealing land, burning homes. You gonna bow to that?" Amos's face darkened, his hand twitching toward his belt. "Watch your tongue, stranger. I'm looking out for Jonah, not you." Jonah raised a hand, his voice cutting through the tension. "Enough. Elias stays. I ain't turning a man out to die." Amos shook his head, mounting his horse. "Your funeral, Jonah. Don't say I didn't warn you." He rode off, his silhouette sharp against the sun, leaving a silence heavy with doubt. Clara's voice, Abigail's, trust in Jonah's memory whispered in his mind. Trust ain't given, it's earned. But Amos's words stung, sowing seeds of suspicion. Had his neighbor turned, lured by Cain's promises? Jonah pushed the thought aside, focusing on the ditch, its channels slowly filling with water, a small victory against the drought. As dusk fell, the horizon flickered with movement. Cain's scouts, closer now, their horses pacing the edge of Jonah's land. Elias spotted them, his hand drifting to a knife hidden in his coat. "They're testing us," he said, "seeing if you'll break." Jonah grabbed his rifle, his heart pounding. "They want to fight, they'll get one. But not tonight." Elias nodded, his gaze distant. "You've given me more than food, Jonah. You've given me a reason to keep going. I'll repay you, I swear it." The words were cryptic, heavy with promise, but Jonah didn't press. They worked until dark, the ditch stronger, the farm's pulse faintly beating again. Inside the cabin, they shared a sparse meal of boiled potatoes, the last of Jonah's stores. Elias ate slowly, his eyes on the fire, and Jonah saw a man carrying burdens as heavy as his own. "You got family?" Jonah asked, breaking the silence. Elias's face tightened, his voice low. "Had a brother. Lost him to Cain's mines. Same as you lost yours." Jonah's chest ached, the shared grief a bridge between them. "Abigail and Lila," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "They deserved better." And Elias met his gaze, his eyes holding a spark of resolve. "So do you. And I'll make sure you get it." The night deepened, the cabin a fragile haven against the desert's threats. Jonah sat by the window, rifle across his lap, watching the shadows. The scouts were gone, but their presence lingered, a promise of Cain's wrath. Then, a flicker of movement caught his eye, a figure slipping away from Amos's land, riding toward Silver Creek. Jonah's blood ran cold. Amos, his neighbor, his friend, was carrying word to Cain, his betrayal as sharp as a blade. The chapter closed with Jonah standing in the moonlight, the ditch's faint trickle a testament to their labor, but also a reminder of the fight ahead. Elias's promise of repayment hung in the air, a mystery tied to the land itself. Jonah's heart was heavy with doubt, but also with a stubborn resolve. He'd given his last meal, his trust, his defiance. The West would test him, but for now, he stood ready, tethered to a stranger by a kindness that refused to break. The Nevada sun blazed mercilessly, a relentless furnace that scorched the earth and withered what little life remained on Jonah Wade's farm. The air shimmered with heat, the horizon a haze of dust and despair. Jonah stood beside the irrigation ditch, its channels now trickling with water thanks to his and Elias's labor, but it was a frail lifeline against the drought's iron grip. His hands, blistered from days of digging, gripped a shovel, his eyes shadowed by the brim of his hat. Dusty, his mule, stood listlessly nearby, her head bowed under the weight of the sun. The farm's corn hung limp, its stalks yellowed, a silent plea for mercy the desert would not grant. Elias worked beside him, his tattered duster streaked with sweat and dirt, his movements steady despite the exhaustion etched into his gaunt face. The stranger's knowledge of water channels, honed in the mines of Silver Creek, had given the farm a fighting chance, but the drought was a foe as ruthless as Silas Kane. Jonah's heart was heavy with Amos's betrayal, confirmed by the sight of his neighbor riding toward town under cover of night. The sting of that treachery was a fresh wound, but Jonah pushed it aside, focusing on the ditch, on survival, on the fragile bond forming with the man he'd fed when he had nothing left to give. The heat pressed down, a physical weight that slowed their work. Elias paused, wiping his brow, and glanced at Jonah. "This land's trying to kill us," he said, his voice rough but laced with a grim humor. "But it ain't won yet," Jonah grunted, driving his shovel into the earth. "Never does. Just keeps testin' till you break." They worked in silence, the rhythm of their shovels a counterpoint to the desert's oppressive stillness. The ditch grew stronger, its banks reinforced with stones, guiding water to the thirstiest crops. Elias's skill was uncanny, his hands carving paths that coaxed every drop from the faint stream. Jonah watched, a grudging respect deepening into something more, a trust he hadn't felt since Abigail and Lila were alive. As midday burned into afternoon, the horizon flickered with movement. 3 of Cain's men, their horses kicking up dust as they approached. Jonah's hand drifted to his revolver, his heart pounding. "They're back," he said, his voice low. "Get to cover." Elias grabbed a pickaxe, his eyes hard. "Let 'em come. We ain't runnin'." Jonah ushered him behind a stack of stones near the ditch, their makeshift fortress. The riders stopped short of the farm, their faces shadowed by hats, rifles glinting in the sun. One, a broad man with a scar across his cheek, called out, his voice dripping with menace. "Wade, hand over the stranger, and we'll leave your sorry patch of dirt alone." Jonah's grip tightened on his revolver, his voice steady. "Ain't got no one to hand over. Ride on." The scarred man laughed, a sound like gravel. "Amos told us you're harboring a thief. Cain wants him, dead or alive." Jonah's blood ran cold, Amos's betrayal now a blade driven deep. He glanced at Elias, whose face was a mask of resolve, his pickaxe ready. "Last chance," Jonah shouted. "Leave, or you won't." The riders charged, their rifles barking. Jonah fired, his shot dropping the scarred man from his saddle, blood blooming in the dust. Elias swung his pickaxe, catching a second rider's arm, sending his weapon flying. The third turned to flee, but Jonah's second shot grazed his horse, sending it bolting into the desert. The skirmish was over in moments, the air thick with gunpowder and silence. Jonah knelt by the scarred man, checking for a pulse. Dead. Elias stood over the second, his pickaxe dripping red, his breath ragged. "They'll come back," Elias said. "Cain don't forgive." Jonah nodded, his mind racing. Amos's treachery had brought this fight to his doorstep, and the cost was rising. He dragged the bodies to a shallow gully, covering them with dirt. The desert would claim them, as it claimed all things. But the weight of the act settled over him, a reminder of the violence that had taken his family. As dusk fell, they returned to the ditch, their hands moving with renewed urgency. The water flowed stronger now, a thin but steady stream nourishing the corn. Elias paused, his eyes distant, and reached into his duster, pulling out a folded piece of leather. He handed it to Jonah, his voice low. "This is why Cain wants me," he said. "A map shows a gold vein right under your land." Jonah unfolded the leather, its crude lines marking a spot near the farm's northern edge. His heart pounded, the promise of gold a double-edged sword. "This what got my family killed?" he asked, his voice thick with grief. Elias shook his head. "Number, but it's what Cain'll kill for. I didn't know it was your land till I saw it. Your kindness, your meal brought me here. I owe you this truth." Jonah's hands trembled, the map a weight heavier than the shovel he'd wielded all day. Gold had destroyed his life once, in the mines that took Abigail and Lila. Yet, it could save the farm, save others from Cain's greed. He looked at Elias, seeing not just a stranger but a man bound to him by shared loss. "We keep this quiet," Jonah said. "For now." Elias nodded, a silent pact sealed in the fading light. They worked until dark, the ditch a lifeline, the farm's pulse beating faintly. Inside the cabin they shared a sparse meal of boiled corn, the last of Jonah's stores gone. By the fire, Jonah spoke, his voice halting but raw. Lost my wife and girl to Cain's mines, he said. Collapse took 'em. I stayed on this land 'cause it's all I got left of 'em. Elias's eyes held a mirror to Jonah's pain. My brother died in those mines too, he said. Cain worked us like dogs, didn't care who got buried. I swore I'd make him pay. The shared grief hung between them, a bond forged in the desert's trial. Jonah looked at the quilt on the wall. Abigail's stitches, a map of love and loss. We ain't so different, he said. But I ain't fightin' for revenge. I'm fightin' for what's mine. Elias leaned forward, his voice fierce. Then we fight together. Cain's comin', but your land's got more than gold, it's got you. The chapter closed with Jonah standing outside, the night sky a canopy of stars over the revitalized ditch. The map burned in his mind, a secret that could save or doom them. Amos's betrayal was a wound, Cain's men, a storm gathering, but Jonah felt a strength he hadn't known since his family's loss. The farm, the stranger, the faint trickle of water, they were his defiance, his reason to stand. The West would test him, but Jonah Wade was ready, tethered to Elias by a meal shared and a fight begun. The Nevada dawn broke with a cruel clarity, its pale light revealing the scars of Jonah Wade's farm, cracked earth, wilted corn, and the irrigation ditch that had become a lifeline through his and Elias's toil. Jonah crouched behind a stack of stones near the ditch, his revolver heavy in his hand, his eyes fixed on the horizon where dust rose like a warning. Elias knelt beside him, his pickaxe gripped tightly, his gaunt face set with a resolve that mirrored Jonah's own. The air was thick with tension, the silence before a storm of lead and fire. Silas Cain's men were coming, drawn by Amos's betrayal and the promise of gold hidden beneath Jonah's land. The ditch, now flowing with a steady trickle, was their stronghold, its banks fortified with stones and timbers from their days of labor. Jonah's heart pounded, not with fear but with a fierce determination to protect what was his, the farm, the memory of Abigail and Lila, the trust he'd given Elias. Amos's treachery, confirmed by his ride to Silver Creek, was a wound as raw as the drought's bite, but Jonah pushed it aside. The map Elias had shown him, marking a gold vein under his land, was a secret that could save or doom them. Today, it would be their battleground. The first shot rang out, a bullet splintering a timber above Jonah's head. He fired back, his revolver barking, dropping a rider before he could close the distance. They're here, Jonah shouted, his voice cutting through the dawn. 10 of Cain's men charged, their horses thundering, rifles blazing. Elias swung his pickaxe, toppling a makeshift dam they'd built in the ditch, sending a surge of water across the attacker's path. The horses faltered, slipping in the mud, giving Jonah and Elias precious seconds to strike. Jonah's shots were precise, honed by years of survival, felling 2 more outlaws as they scrambled for cover. Elias moved like a shadow, his knife flashing as he tackled a man trying to flank them. The ditch became their fortress, its muddy banks a trap that slowed Cain's men. But the odds were grim, 10 against 2, and Jonah's ammunition was dwindling. A bullet grazed his arm, blood soaking his sleeve, but he gritted his teeth, firing again. His vision narrowed to the fight. From the chaos emerged Amos, his horse rearing as he rode among Cain's men, his face pale with guilt. Jonah's heart twisted, betrayal and friendship warring within him. Amos, he roared, his voice raw. You brought this. Amos's eyes met his, filled with shame. I didn't want this, Jonah, he shouted, drawing his pistol. Cain promised to spare my land. But before he could say more, a bullet struck his shoulder, and he fell, blood staining the dust. Jonah lunged, dragging Amos behind the stones, his anger burning but tempered by the sight of his friend's pain. Why? He demanded, his voice low, fierce. Amos gasped, clutching his wound. I was scared, Jonah. Lost everything to the drought. Cain, he offered a way out. Jonah's grip tightened on his revolver, the urge to judge Amos warring with the memory of their shared years. But there was no time for reckoning. A new wave of attackers pressed forward, their shouts echoing. Elias shouted, the ditch, flooded again. Jonah yanked a lever they'd rigged, releasing another surge of water, tripping horses and men in a muddy chaos. The move bought them time, but not enough. A tall figure emerged from the fray, Silas Cain himself, his black coat stark against the dawn, his face cold with greed. Wade, he called, his voice smooth as venom. Give me the stranger, and I'll let you keep your dirt patch. Jonah stood, his revolver trained on Cain, blood dripping from his arm. "This land's mine," he said, his voice steady. "And Elias ain't yours to take." Cain laughed, his pistol gleaming. "You're a fool. The mining company wants this valley your gold. The Dinah's Springs, every acre. You can't stop progress." The truth hit Jonah like a blow. Cain was a pawn, backed by a company hungry for more than gold. But his focus narrowed to the moment, to the farm, to the man beside him. Elias stepped forward, his voice fierce. "You'll get nothing, Cain. This land's got a heart you'll never understand." The standoff shattered as Cain fired, his bullet grazing Elias's side. Jonah returned fire, his shot striking Cain's leg, dropping him to his knees. Elias charged, tackling another outlaw, his knife ending the threat. But the fight wasn't over. One of Cain's men grabbed a torch, aiming for the cornfield. Jonah dove, knocking the torch away, but a stray bullet caught Amos as he staggered to his feet, trying to help. Amos fell, his eyes meeting Jonah's find, a silent apology in his final breath. Jonah's heart broke, but he fought on, his revolver emptying as he and Elias drove the remaining outlaws back. The last man, a young scout, threw down his weapon, hands raised. "Don't shoot," he pleaded. "Cain forced us. The company, they'll ruin us all if we don't obey." Jonah's finger hovered on the trigger, rage and grief surging. He saw Abigail's grave, Lila's smile, Amos's lifeless form. Vengeance called, but Elias's voice cut through, low and steady. "He's tellin' the truth, Jonah. Let him face a judge, not a bullet." Jonah lowered his gun, his chest heaving. "Get out," he said, his voice cold. "Tell your company I'm comin' for him." The scout fled, leaving the farm in silence, the air thick with blood and gunpowder. Cain lay wounded, cursing, his empire crumbling. Jonah bound his hands, his decision a weight he carried like his wounds. Elias knelt beside him, blood seeping from his side, but his eyes burned with purpose. "You did right, Jonah," he said. "Now let me repay you." They moved to the northern edge of the farm, where the map marked the gold. Elias dug, his pickaxe striking earth until it hit stone, a hidden vein, glinting in the dawn light. "This is yours," Elias said, his voice raw. "For the meal, for the trust, for standin' with me." Jonah stared at the gold, its shine a bitter echo of the mines that took his family. But it was also a chance to save the farm, to defy the company, to honor Abigail's kindness. He nodded, his resolve unbroken. "We'll use it," he said, "but not for greed, for us, for the land." The chapter closed with Jonah and Elias standing over the vein, the farm scarred but standing, the ditch flowing strong. Amos's death was a heavy loss, but the gold was a promise, a weapon against the company's shadow. Jonah's heart was raw, but it beat with purpose, tethered to Elias by a meal shared, and a fight won. The West was unforgiving, but they'd carved out a victory, however fleeting. The Nevada sun rose over Jonah Wade's farm, its golden light bathing the parched fields in a glow that felt like redemption. The irrigation ditch, rebuilt through days of toil with Elias, flowed steadily, a lifeline that breathed faint hope into the wilted corn. Jonah stood beside the northern edge of his land, where the gold vein glinted beneath the earth, its shine a promise and a burden. His arm, grazed in the battle against Silas Cain's men, throbbed under a makeshift bandage, but the pain was a distant echo compared to the weight of what he'd gained and lost. Amos's death, a sacrifice born of guilt, hung heavy, but the farm stood, scarred yet unbowed, a testament to the bond forged with a stranger. Elias knelt nearby, his tattered duster streaked with blood and dirt, his face weary but resolute. The gold, uncovered after their stand against Cain, was more than a treasure. It was a debt repaid, a symbol of the meal Jonah had shared when he had nothing left. Dusty, Jonah's mule, grazed quietly, her presence a grounding force in the stillness. The air carried the scent of sage and earth, a fragile peace after the bloodshed of dawn. Jonah's eyes traced the vein, its glint stirring memories of Abigail and Lila, lost to the mines that hungered for such wealth. "This gold," he said, his voice rough, "it's what took my family, but it could save this land." Elias rose, his gray eyes steady. "It's yours to choose, Jonah. Use it for greed, and it'll curse you like it cursed Cain. Use it for good, and it's a gift from the earth itself." Jonah nodded, his resolve hardening. He'd seen what gold did to men like Cain, whose empire now lay broken, his body bound and awaiting a judge in Silver Creek. But Jonah's heart, scarred by loss, saw a different path, a way to honor Abigail's kindness, to rebuild not just his farm but the lives of those crushed by the mining company's greed. They worked through the morning, carefully extracting the gold, its weight heavy in their hands. Jonah hid most of it beneath the cabin's floorboards, keeping only enough to buy seed, tools, and water rights to revive the farm. Elias, his side bandaged from the fight, worked with a quiet intensity, his debt to Jonah driving him. "You fed me when I was nothing," he said, pausing to meet Jonah's gaze. "This gold, it's your kindness coming back to you." Jonah's throat tightened, Abigail's voice echoing in his mind. "We share what we have, Jonah. It's what makes us human." He looked at the farm, its fields stirring with faint green, and felt a purpose he thought he'd buried with his family. "Ain't just for me," he said. "We'll share it, help the folks Cain ruined." As the sun climbed, riders approached not Cain's men, but a group of Dene from a nearby camp, led by a woman named Adsila. Her face was lined with wisdom, her eyes carrying the weight of a people long pressed by miners and settlers. She dismounted, her presence commanding, and spoke in measured English. "We heard of your fight," she said. "You stood against Cain, a man who threatens our springs. Your heart is strong, Jonah Wade." Jonah lowered his head, uneasy with praise. "Did what was right," he said. "Your people don't owe me." Adsila's smile was faint but warm. "The earth sees kindness. We offer horses, blankets, and our protection. The company behind Cain will come. We stand with you." The offer struck Jonah like a ray of light through the desert's haze. The Dene had kept their distance since the mine collapse, their trust eroded by men like Cain. Now, their alliance was a bridge, built on the shared struggle against greed. They brought 3 horses, their coats gleaming, and woven blankets that Ruth would have loved. Elias spoke to Adsila in halting Dene, learned from his years in the mines, and Jonah saw respect in her nod. By dusk, the farm hummed with quiet activity. The Dene helped shore up the ditch, their hands deft as they guided water to the fields. Jonah and Elias distributed the gold's first yield coins to buy seed for neighboring farms, tools for those Cain had driven to ruin. The act felt like a prayer, a defiance of the despair that had gripped Jonah for years. He thought of Amos, his neighbor lost to guilt and redemption, and vowed to make his sacrifice mean something. That night, they gathered in the cabin, the fire casting warmth over the sparse room. Elias sat by the hearth, his wounds cleaned but his eyes distant. Jonah pulled Abigail's quilt from the wall, draping it over Elias's shoulders. "You're stayin'," he said, his voice firm. "This farm's got room for 2. Elias shook his head, his smile bittersweet. "You've given me more than a meal, Jonah. You've given me a reason to believe again. But I'm a wanderer. The road's my home." Jonah's chest ached, the thought of losing another companion too much like losing family. "You don't owe me nothing," he said. "Stay, and we'll face the company together." Elias's eyes held gratitude, but also a restlessness Jonah knew too well. "You've got the Dene, the farm, a future," he said. "I've repaid my debt. The gold's yours to build with. Me, I've got my own ghost to chase." The next morning, Elias saddled one of the Dene's horses, his duster patched but proud. Jonah stood by the ditch, the farm alive with new green, the gold hidden but its promise alive. "You'll always have a place here," Jonah said, his voice thick. Elias clasped his hand, a bond sealed in blood and trust. "You're a good man, Jonah Wade. Keep that heart of yours." He rode off, his silhouette fading into the plains, a lone figure against the vast sky. The chapter closed with Jonah standing on his farm, the ditch flowing, the fields stirring with life. The Dene camp nearby was a quiet ally, their fires a beacon in the dusk. The mining company loomed, a shadow yet to be faced, but Jonah was no longer alone. The gold, born of his kindness, was a tool to rebuild, to honor Abigail and Lila, to defy the greed that had taken them. He looked to the horizon, where Elias had vanished, and felt a peace he hadn't known in years. The West was unforgiving, but Jonah Wade had found its heart in the earth, in the stranger, in the hope that endured.